world's favorite comic book hero, followed by 84 million readers a year. Now, he comes alive. For the first time on the screen, you'll see it all. The spectacular adventures of the amazing Spider-Man.
He can do the things a spider does, climb walls and spin webs, and he's very, very strong.
You've heard about him. You've read about him. Now, you'll see him in action.
Kill him.
No challenge is too great. No enemy is too strong. The most popular, most daring, most exciting superhero in the entire world. At last, he comes alive for his most incredible adventure. Now, Spider-Man takes on a madman who's turning the streets into a siege of terror. More and more people are being mysteriously hypnotized into threatening the entire city and destroying themselves. Look up high as one man does the impossible. He uses all his fantastic spider powers to battle the most evil forces ever imagined. Astounding live-action excitement. The super adventure of everybody's favorite superhero. Spider-Man. Now, he lives.
Hi, everybody, and welcome once again to GeekFest Rants. I have here with me one of our regulars. It doesn't get any more regular than this. I have Steve Avona. Say hi, Steve.
Hi, and I'm feeling very regular today, Carlos.
It's all about regularity,
Yes.
I hear, if you listen to those yogurt commercials. We are going to be talking about not only comic book movies, but the
And TV shows.
The TV shows also, but we're talking really about the kind of like the redheaded stepchild children, if you will, of what today we know as the modern superhero movies and TV shows. Right now, we talked about this in the past many times. Children are super spoiled right now. Children, and especially teenagers, let's say, or kids in between, young to teenage years, they think probably that the superhero film is something that's been around forever. And in a way, it kind of has.
Yeah.
But the quality of material that they're used to now is absolutely nothing compared to the type of stuff that we kind of started seeing trickling in probably in the 70s and in the 80s and even up to the 90s.
Oh, yeah.
That now it's like night and day.
Oh, definitely.
And also in the previous shows, we've talked about these eras. Now, again, the serials have been on forever, 40s and 50s. You did Superman, Batman, even Captain America. You could watch these black and white serials. Eventually, they went to color. But later on, we kind of highlighted these pivotal points in entertainment, especially in comic book, television, and film, where what I would call, we kind of refer to as the Christopher Reeve Superman era, the late 70s, which all of a sudden, all these films started popping up, and because of the popularity of Superman and how good that particular first film, and I would even go as far as saying second film, were. But you got to remember, sprinkled around Superman, we had a whole bunch of other stuff that everybody tried to cash in on this whole, can this whole superhero thing take off?
Right.
We later saw it again happen probably around 2000 when X-Men, around the 2000 era, 99, 2000, when X-Men came out. Again, this flurry of activity. And then the current era, which we talked about again earlier, is the one that probably started around the Iron Man time. And now we're in Avengers world and that kind of thing. Now, we're going to be dealing with both DC and Marvel primarily because there are other comic book franchises out there, but the majority of the stuff that we're going to be hitting is probably DC and Marvel. And Steve, why don't we start off with, and we're not going in any particular order, we're going to go from film to television, old to newer, back and forth, but why don't we talk a little bit about Howard the Duck and why that is something that's important and why it was such a disaster?
Well, Howard the Duck was an extremely popular, sort of subversive kind of underground Marvel comic in the late 70s that had a real, I guess, cult following.
It wasn't mainstream.
No, it wasn't mainstream, and it was also part of a very famous lawsuit by its creator, who tried to get the rights back from Marvel, which he was unsuccessful at. But that's a whole nother show. But
before the movie,
before the movie, yeah.
Oh wow!
And Howard was sort of a satire. A lot of it was a very satirical, political satire. Any kind of satire. It went after comic book satire. I mean, anything. And
what years are we talking about?
We're talking like 75, 6,
oh, wow.
7. And I have to admit that it was over my head when I was a kid. I didn't read Howard the Duck, and it really was gone.
You were more into the basic food groups.
Yeah, I was too young for that kind of stuff. But by the time I really came of age, Howard was gone because of the lawsuit. Marvel was not publishing it. And then from out of nowhere, all of a sudden, you think, as you mentioned before, Superman had hit. And there was all this talk of, possibly a Batman movie and other things happening. And Marvel was kind of trying to get things moving on television. And after that sort of late 70s period, there was nothing really happening with the Marvel characters. And all of a sudden, Lucasfilm announces a Howard the Duck film.
Well, you got to remember also, as far as why on earth would George Lucas and Lucasfilm be involved in such a thing, you got to remember that, it's after 1983. Lucas is done with Star Wars. He's burnt out, basically. He's done with it. Indiana Jones is also kind of, I don't want to say winding down, but he already has the first and the second one in the can.
Right.
And, you kind of see in the horizon that Indiana Jones is probably on its way down. So Lucas, traditionally, from what I understand, always tried and not always succeeded. I would even go as far as say almost never succeeded in trying to revive certain genres. He tried Willow. So he wanted to do kind of like a Lord of the Rings type of thing and failed. Peter Jackson succeeded. And then he said, all right, let's go the comic book route. Nobody's really tapping into too much comic book type of stuff since Superman. At the time, I don't believe Batman had come out yet, had it?
It had not, but it was like in development hell, let's put it that way.
So I guess Lucas might have said to himself, let's go for the untraditional comic book. And that's how I guess he took a shot at Howard the Duck.
Yeah, he missed wildly, let's put it that way. I mean, from, again, not having read the comic, at this point in my life, I was aware of Howard and I was aware of what the character and what the comic was all about. And then I saw the film, and I had seen it on video. I mean, once it was bombed, I wasn't going to see it in the theater.
Oh, I saw it in the theater.
No,
my God. I did see it in the theater.
And from what again, not reading the comic, but seeing the movie and realizing that they sapped all of the satire and or maybe they tried to get, I don't know what they were going for, but the movie was so hysterically bad that and Howard looked terrible. I mean, I don't what the hell was going on.
Well, again, pre-CGI, everything practical, effects, everything done, rotoscoping and stop motion and, traditional 80s effects. This is 1986, I think we're talking about. So it had the right material in terms of there was money behind it, but it just completely flopped. And it wasn't even, Lucas didn't even direct it, but this is a period of time where we're very familiar with, where if you saw George Lucas Presents or Steven Spielberg Presents, we would go see it.
Right.
And most of them were duds.
I have to say that, one of the things that I think is true across the board, that is true of Howard and other failed superhero adaptations, is when you go for camp, and I think that's what they went for, just assuming that comic books equal camp, you're screwed. I mean, that was really, really not what the character was all about. And I think I don't think they knew what they had on their hands, but they went the camp route, and it was, I shudder when I think about it.
It's funny because obviously we actually finally, many years later, got to see Howard again as a little cameo in Guardians, right? And if you think about it, it's funny also because of the fact that, now we're dealing with these modern Marvel films and DC films. And I would say Guardians of the Galaxy is probably the closest thing to somewhat campy, somewhat funny, somewhat off the serious track, and how they succeeded in it, as opposed to how they, Howard the Duck movie completely failed at it.
Right.
It's ironic, and I guess they did it on purpose. They put Howard there just to remind everybody that, yes, it is possible to kind of go off, the rails a little bit and still make it good.
Exactly. And I would be happy to see Howard again if Marvel ever decided to do. I'm sure they would do it right.
I wouldn't be surprised. Tell me, Steve, what exactly is Man-Thing?
Man-Thing, a lot of people, there's a big, I guess, kind of a controversy. Who came first, Man-Thing or Swamp Thing? I believe they both, again, I'm not the all-knowing. I know, a decent amount. I'm not sure if Man-Thing... You're
not the Karnak of comic books?
I can't remember. I know Swamp Thing came out in 72. I think Man-Thing might have come out either in 71 or 72. But there's sort of this kind of who came first, who stole it from who. But Man-Thing and Swamp Thing are different yet similar characters, All
right, well, you know what? Since they are so close to each other, let's talk about both of them at this stage.
Well,
Go ahead.
Man-Thing was a character who, they were both, Man-Thing and Swamp Thing have parallels in terms of their origins, and they were both scientists who were attacked, or, people like industrial espionage, industrial spies, whatever, went after them to try and steal a formula that they were both concocting for, new growth, whatever, save
and
the
something
world.
Goes wrong.
And they both end up burning and on fire and douse themselves in the swamp and come out as these creatures. Man-Thing came out as a creature who, a very unique design. He has like these bulbous red eyes and almost like an elephant's snout.
Yeah, like a trunk kind
like
of thing,
trunk.
Right?
And he has no mouth. He can't speak. And he's like a very dull creature who responds to emotion when, I think he's definitely a force for good, but he has this ability, especially if the line on the Man-Thing was whatever knows fear burns at the touch of the Man-Thing. So, he was going after somebody who was trying to kill him, or somebody was scared of him, he touched him, he set him on fire. And there was also sort of a mystical element to the character. Swamp Thing, same deal, comes out of the swamp, burned the human head, but he retains his intellect, and he's, super strong, super powerful, whatever. And he becomes, more sort of straight up hero with the horror element to it.
Okay.
And then in later years, his origin is sort of changed and modified in the comics, but the movies never really followed that. The movies and the TV series never really followed that.
Well, I watched Swamp Thing, I remember, in the theater. It was one of those, 80s thing where I would go into a local movie theater and spend a day there, hop from one movie to the other. And I remember Swamp Thing, and I remember, I tell you, the thing I remember the most, and I hate to admit it, but hey, what are you going to do, was Adrienne Barbeau.
Oh, yeah,
she has a certain scene in the water.
Oh, yeah. Who could forget that? But honestly, I was very excited for Swamp Thing. I did not get to see it in the theater because it came and went so quickly, but I had a desire to, because that was really post Superman. That was it. That, for a big
you're right. It was before Batman, post Superman.
This is 1982, and it was really bombed. So I didn't get a chance to see it, and I also was not very familiar with the comic, but I was still excited that a comic book movie was coming out, and I started to read the comic, because of it, and I ended up seeing the movie, on cable and loving it, and love it to this day.
Yeah, I agree with you. It wasn't as bad as the majority of the stuff we're talking about today is, but the success was horrible. No, it was just it completely tanked. A big-time director in terms of these days, not even these days, in terms of horror fans.
Yeah.
This is Wes Craven, right?
Yeah, Wes Craven, who was a big name even back then, pre-Nightmare on Elm Street, but the movie gets a really, really bad rap, and I don't know if critics just didn't get it or what. Again, they accused it of being campy. I did not find it campy in the slightest. That was the sequel. This movie really...
Now, the sequel was that went straight to video?
No,
or to the movie
that came
theater?
out in the theaters. That was Return of Swamp Thing in 1989, and what was interesting about that one is that they really, really improved the suit. The suit was fantastic, and it really mimicked the evolution of the character in the comic. But the movie was completely played for laughs. I mean, it was like, they did get Louis Jourdain again to play the villain. They got Heather Locklear.
That's right. He was in the original. You're right.
And they got Heather Locklear, and everybody else who was in it could not act at all.
Wow.
It was a disaster. That was in the days when, these movies still could come out in the theater.
Right.
But it came and went, and, it's hard to watch. Let's put it that way.
What about the television series?
A television series was done a little more seriously. But the production values, again, this came at the sort of the beginning of the syndicated television era, post Next Generation, where they were really loading up these local channels with
They would just try anything to see what would stick against the wall.
And Swamp Thing, I believe, lasted at least 3 seasons, and I fell off the wagon with it. It was very cheaply made, and again, it was like Universal Studios Florida, really.
Is that like Xena budgets type of stuff?
Yeah, I mean, less than Xena, and it just got tiresome, and
Now, going back to Man-Thing, do you remember the film itself?
Yeah, sure. The movie was one of the...
Did you see it in the theater or video?
It never came out in the theater. It was released straight to
Really?
video, and video and like Sci-Fi Channel.
Anybody known?
No, it was made in Australia, and it was one of the last of when Marvel had licensed out some of their characters to other studios. I mean, this came out in 2005, so I mean, it was not at the time when Marvel was doing crap. I mean, it was good stuff was coming out then, but they had given the rights to, I guess it was Lionsgate or whoever preceded Lionsgate, and they made a movie on the cheap in Australia with no-name actors and completely ruined the character of Man-Thing. He barely is in the movie. I mean, I think if he's got 5 or 10 minutes of screen time, it's a lot. And he doesn't move. He's like stationary and looks like cheap. I mean, it's kind of sad. It's a character that I hope maybe someday Marvel will tackle again. It's not, it's not worth your time.
All right. Well, let's go to something that you're probably more familiar or more fond of, and that is the 77 Spider-Man.
Mm-hmm.
I understand that, and I don't remember watching. I remember seeing, maybe it was just like a TV movie version of it. I don't remember seeing the entire series, but tell us about, was this the first time they actually put a live action Spider-Man?
Well, they all came out around the same time. Spider-Man, the Hulk, Doctor Strange, Captain America. I believe they all hit in 77.
Yep.
Spider-Man was the Hulk was obviously the most successful and, went on for like 5 seasons. Spider-Man was the only other of the pilots that went to series, and it was a very erratic series. I mean, it's bizarre to say it only lasted 13 episodes, but 13 episodes across like 2 seasons.
Wow.
So they did a pilot. Stan Lee had gone out to LA to try and drum up business, get Marvel on the map, in Hollywood.
And this is pre-Superman, so
yeah,
it sounds like this is just them on their own trying to get to get the ball rolling.
Well, Superman is in production right now. I mean, Superman came out in 78.
So you think they're aware of it and they know it's going to be a hit?
Well, they don't know that it's going to be a hit, but they, again, this is coming at a time when Hollywood is sort of waking up to the possibility that these characters could maybe be something. But it's, as you mentioned at the outset, the technology was so far behind what they could show realistically.
If you think about it, this is also pre-Star Wars, because Star Wars is in production a year before this, so they can't really say, "Ooh, we got to jump, we got to do something."
Right? They're just, they're just sort of mining the territory for any properties that they can, feasibly make look not like. I mean, at this point in time, you obviously can't do something like X-Men. You can't do something like Fantastic Four, but you could try to do Spider-Man. You could try to do Captain America,
like Batman from the 60s, just one notch up.
Right. So they made this pilot with Nicholas Hammond was the actor who played Peter Parker, whose only claim to fame really prior to Spider-Man was he was one of the kids in The Sound of Music. And he was also the kid who threw the football at Marcia in the Brady Bunch that made her nose went all huge. And he had acted, as a kid and as a teenager.
A nice looking guy, blue eyes, very.
Yeah. And so the movie, the pilot, and again, here's what all that old comic book stuff suffered from. And again, I think it was more not their fault because just they couldn't afford this stuff. But you never saw them fighting supervillains. They were always like cheesy thugs and bank robbers and mad scientists and, you know, all kinds of mobs and all that kind of stuff.
Well, I guess they spend most of their effects money on the Spider-Man effect.
Yeah, which wasn't...
And they couldn't afford villain effects.
Right, which wasn't... The Spider-Man effect wasn't all that impressive either. I mean, you know, either you had a stuntman doing, you know, some climbing, or you actually had... It has to see... Yeah, I'm trying to describe it. It was a sort of a blue screen, green screen kind of thing. It would be like a point of view, like say you were looking down from a building watching Spider-Man climb up. And he's climbing up the building, but it's so obviously
you could see the lines.
It's like a green screen or a blue screen or something. Yeah. He's walking on something. Yeah, you know, it's like a plate. He's like
the only thing I remember clearly is a scene where I think they're at the Empire State Building and a guy's about to jump off. It might be Peter Parker, and a little thing gets caught on this thing that's controlling his mind, and it hooks on his lapel, and he all of a sudden becomes clear. His mind is like, oh, I'm not under mind control anymore, or something like that.
Mm-hmm. You know, the way I look at Spider-Man is it was kind of bland. It was bland and a little on the cheesy side, but it was watchable, especially for a 7-8-year-old kid.
I mean, this is why when you finally got to see Raimi's Spider-Man, it completely blew you away.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I almost had a stroke. But this, you know, this was making me happy. I was a little kid and I was seeing this stuff on television, not in cartoons. You know, I mean, cartoons were great, but this was live action, and you know, so I was okay with it. And to this day, I can still watch it. I mean, it's knowing what it is, and it's probably nostalgia more than anything else. But you know, it's not awful. Let's put it that way. I mean, some of the other stuff is harder to watch.
Well, speaking of harder to watch, let's move on to Nick Fury, and I think it was the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D.?
Yeah, that was the first version of Nick.
1998.
Fox did a bunch of pilots for Marvel.
Well, tell us the best part about it.
No, the Hoff.
The Hoff, baby. This is post Knight Rider Hoff. This is him like he's at the height of his German popularity.
Or the height of his Baywatch Mitch powers. You
there
know?
You go.
I mean, I mean, I don't know what they were smoking when they cast him, and if they wanted to be taken seriously. I mean, again, Fox. You know, Fox was kind of, again, this is like right before X-Men and right as this is the same year that Blade came out, and everybody talks about X-Men, but it's Blade that you
Blade
have to
really
think about.
started it, but Blade was a quiet start.
It was a quiet
X-Men
start.
was a big, loud start.
Yes, but Blade is the one you really have to give credit to. And anyway, Fox did a bunch of pilots. They did Generation X, which is sort of a spin-off of X-Men. That went nowhere. They did Nick Fury, and that also went nowhere. And it was, it was somewhere between serious and camp.
Was it anything like the current show?
No. I mean, the current show, I mean, they tried to, I'll give them credit. They tried to be somewhat faithful to the comic and, you know, the characters, and, you know, they used characters from the comic, but it was cheap and cheesy, and it just, I couldn't take him seriously. I mean, I could have thought of a million other actors who would have done this character justice. And
is it because his Baywatch persona is everywhere?
I mean, that
can't get away from it.
That overwhelms the whole thing. You know, he is more of a persona than an actor. And
he was cool in Knight Rider. I remember Knight Rider was great.
Yeah, but by the time Baywatch and all that,
I mean, he became a different person.
He had been on Baywatch for almost 10 years by this time, and it was just not. You know, I mean, again, I make a point of seeing anything and everything that's superhero related, and even back in those days.
At least once.
Yeah, back in those days, and especially, you know, I was sort of a connoisseur of that stuff. And people would be like, you really saw that? You have a copy of that? You really, you know? And it was kind of, you know, I was kind of the man for that stuff. But I mean, I knew, you know, a lot of it was garbage.
You were basically a living, breathing YouTube channel.
Yeah, that's what I was. You know, I would go to the conventions and I would buy the bootlegs, or if I was lucky enough to record it off television.
And then you're like, come here, kid. I want to show you something.
I showed you guys a lot of cool stuff.
Come to my basement.
now it's all on YouTube. It's just like ruined my whole vibe, you know?
Well,
Anybody
speaking
can.
of on YouTube, as I mentioned off air, right before we were having this conversation, I was watching Doctor Strange. And you mentioned before, this is part of the Spider-Man era of all of a sudden trying to throw everything and see what sticks.
Right.
What exactly, and I'm mentioning Doctor Strange because obviously they announced a new Doctor Strange and they've had plenty of animated Doctor Strange, but I never really realized until about a month ago that there was actually a shot pilot for a Doctor Strange series that, again, never made it to series, correct?
Right. And that came out, that was probably the last of the pilots. I think it came out in 78.
Okay.
And again, you talk about a character who really, really needs the special effects of, like, you know, dimensional travel and magic and all these sort of crazy looking creatures, magical realms and all this stuff, and just showing off his powers.
This is like Thor level mythology, I guess, or Thor level.
So it was, you almost knew it was doomed to fail. You know, again,
let me tell you something. From the few minutes I watched, the only thing, other than the fact that to me, whenever you watch these things on YouTube, they kind of look like porn because the quality is so bad. Yeah. It's not exactly video, but it's very low quality film. Well, yeah. And because it's on YouTube, this is probably like 8th generation of something.
I mean, don't forget.
But I'm going to tell you something. The music, there was a scene in the movie where I think they're preparing something right in the beginning, and they are playing this very techno-y, at the time probably called electronica, synth pop music. I absolutely love that. I'm looking for it now on YouTube so I can make an MP3 out of it. Well, it's very retro.
Yeah. I mean, well, I'm glad you found something to enjoy. I mean, you know, the thing is, you know, as good as any of these might have been, they were always going to be hampered by the effects. I remember, especially for Doctor Strange, I remember them at the end of the movie showing, you know, a shot of the villain, monster, demon, whatever. Yeah. And it's like, I don't know, you see it for like a few seconds. I mean, it's not like subliminal. You see it.
But it's supposed to be the money shot.
And it's awful. It's so awful. And I'm like, holy cow. But again, you know, that was probably of the 4, Spider-Man, Hulk, Captain America, Doctor Strange, that was my least favorite character. Wow. So I wasn't like, oh, you know, I'm so disappointed, you know.
Heartbroken, yeah.
You know, I was more interested in the other 3. I remember seeing it, and I bought the VHS. I have a store-bought, you know, SP copy VHS of this movie. You know, it was like $10.
For those of you who don't know what SP means, that's the best you could get for VHS. You could get,
you know, maybe it was $10 or whatever. And I'll tell you something, this is true of all this stuff. Anytime it was ever released, either on laser, VHS, DVD, or Blu-ray, I bought it.
Oh yeah, you sure did.
I mean, I would always
imported from Japan, imported from somewhere.
Yeah, and I, you know, I make no bones about that. Having that obscurity in my collection, I love that.
Well, let's jump to Captain America then, because you said Captain America was slightly better quality. Was it as good as Spider-Man, or
are we talking about the Captain America pilot, or are we talking about the movie? The movie in 1990 or the pilot in 1978?
Oh, I thought there was only the movie, the 1990 movie. Tell me about the TV pilot.
Okay, there were 2.
Oh my goodness.
Obviously, you know, they thought enough of the first one to make a second one, which was very rare, but it did not go to series. And again, they just altered the hell out of it. And
any known names here?
Well, Reb Brown played Captain America, and he was sort of a beefcake actor of the 70s. And I don't know, maybe you'd know from your, you know, cheesy sci-fi days. He was your Hunter from the Future.
Oh my God, I remember that.
That's besides Cap. That's his claim to fame. He was also
they're Adam West wannabes.
He was also in the movie Cage with Lou Ferrigno. Anyway, it was, you know, you think about even the 1990 movie was so much more faithful to the comic than this. In this one, they made him the son of the original Captain America. Okay. And he was like this California surfer hippie. And it just, you know, he had this god-awful costume spandex thing that was just, I mean, the first movie, the costume didn't even look it was red, white, and blue, but it really did not look like the Captain America costume. And then the second pilot, they gave him the costume, but he wore this motorcycle helmet because he was always on his cap cycle, and he had this blue helmet that went around the headpiece.
Which is the one you wrote your piece on, the television one or the film one?
No, I wrote my piece on the movie. This
okay.
Although I covered this in my St. John's, my college special.
Yeah.
And I had a clip from it. But so they did two of them. They just were not successful. They came out almost a year apart, and they went nowhere. It was just really.
Wow.
I mean, if I had to sort of rate them, I would say the Hulk was the best, then Spider-Man. Then it's like a tie. I mean, Doctor Strange, I think, was cheesy, but more faithful than Captain America. And then Captain America was just, And another little factoid, in the second Captain America pilot, the villain was played by Christopher Lee.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And he's like the main...
Is it the Red Skull or no?
No, they never used the Red Skull. I never used any of the villains.
Ugh.
Never. So that was always a big disappointment. The Hulk TV series lasted 5 years. Never once did they use a villain from the comic.
Too expensive. The effects are probably too difficult.
Mm-hmm.
What can you tell me about Justice League? Now, this is big now because of the fact that we know DC is trying to do something Justice League related, but apparently in 97 they put out a series, again, pilot, and never made it.
Right. It was another one back in this is now we're talking late 90s, and I'm really in my glory with getting bootlegs. And I remember this was at a time when I was trading bootlegs. The internet had just came around, and there were all these bulletin boards and forums where people were trading bootlegs. And this was one that I was really hot for because they covered it in some magazine. And I think I'd seen some really horrible screen grabs of it.
Well, in YouTube, I was only able to find clips, not the entire thing.
Yeah. But some people, I was able to get a really lousy copy of it. And that was another thing. I would always sort of upgrade my copies. But yeah, the DC did a pilot in 97 that was sort of based on a later version of the Justice League, not the traditional Justice League that everybody thinks of. It was, although they had sort of traditional characters like the Flash and Green Lantern and the Atom, but they also had Fire and Ice, who were characters from a later version. And they also, I mean, you talk about casting. They had David Ogden Stiers playing the Martian Manhunter, Winchester from MASH, and he was so friggin' fat. That, I mean, this is a muscle-bound character.
Yeah, that's one of the reviews I heard. I listened to on YouTube. They're talking about how big he looks, and it's like he sounds really good, but he looks kind of big.
It was really scary, and the costumes are pretty bad. It kind of straddles the line between camp and serious.
Yeah, the comedy's really they're pushing it hard.
And some of the actors are these complete no-names who never went anywhere. Miguel Ferrer plays the villain.
Yes.
And the only name that I remember is, the one who plays Fire. I can't remember her name off the top of my head, but she was in Law and Order SVU.
Oh, wow. So these people recovered.
I think Michelle something. I can't remember her name. But John Kassir, who was the Crypt Keeper in Tales from the Crypt,
oh my God,
plays the Atom. And he's also done a lot of stuff.
Huh?
But
now, let me ask you something. Is this the same Atom that we might be seeing in Arrow?
Yeah. Ray
the
Palmer.
Same type of character.
Same character, yeah.
Got it. Okay, that's interesting.
But again, I think it's funny because when a good copy finally started, it was actually aired, I want to say somewhere in South America.
Really?
And it was aired and...
Why?
Who the hell knows? But that's when a good bootleg started to circulate.
Wow,
that I got. But yeah, I mean, this is 97 now. We're right on the cusp of, DC, still is lagging far behind Marvel. But
they're playing catch up. We talked about this a million times. They're always playing catch up.
But Marvel was right on the cusp of, breaking out. And the JLA pilot is really sort of that, and Nick Fury is sort of the last of the crap.
And it's got that flavor, that just cheese-laden flavored. Now, tell me, what do you know about Shazam?
Well, Shazam, I feel very fondness for, because that, besides, you mentioned the serials before, but there was also a Superman television show. There was a Batman television show that we've talked about, and those were on in heavy syndication when we were kids, and I watched them. But Shazam was the first live action superhero show that actually came out when I was a kid.
This is 80s, like
No, this
80s.
this is like 74, 75.
Really? That old?
Yeah. Oh, sure.
Oh, my goodness. I thought it was part of this 80s craze.
No, and it was syndicated up until then, and they only made like 30 episodes, but they syndicated them until,
Wow.
or I should say repeated them up until the early 80s. But it was a sort of, it was Saturday morning stuff, and it was very much teaching morality lessons to kids. And it was all about, Billy Batson, who was, said the magic words to become Shazam. I mean, if you think about the premise of the show now, it was so creepy. He traveled in a Winnebago with this old guy who he called Mentor, and like they hung out in like you were like, okay, this old dude and this teenager
Ice cream trucks?
riding the highways and byways of the country, righting wrongs. And he would, it would be stuff that, like, don't steal, don't be a bully, don't lie. I mean, that was sort of the premise of every
Very
show.
basic, yeah.
Some kid got in trouble and it would get like a little hairy for him. And then, Billy would have to turn into Shazam and fix the whole thing. And the effects were, the flying effects was straight out of the Superman TV show with the green screen, him on top of the green screen, and it was just...
I guess Greatest American Hero blew everything away afterwards.
Yeah. The show was finally released, like the DVD on demand, within the last, I want to say, like 3 years, which I
Oh my God.
which I bought, and I had bootlegs of off-air recordings that people had made in the 70s that I bought at conventions. But yeah, it was, I think they made like 27 or 28 episodes, and it was only in production from like I want to say 74 to 77.
Again, any known names in this?
Well, the guy who played Mentor was an actor by the name of Les Tremaine, who, believe it or not, was in North by Northwest with Cary Grant.
Really?
Yeah,
Holy
and
crap.
he was a character actor from the old days. And, the guys who played, there were two guys who played Captain Marvel. They do the convention circuit and sign pictures. And Michael Gray, who played Billy Batson, again, he went nowhere, but he was a, sort of a teen beat actor at the time.
I see.
But a very, very fondly remembered show for me.
Now, I want to hit Superboy next. And it's funny because to me, the modern era of Superman television shows, as far as I'm concerned, is Smallville and Lois and Clark.
Yeah.
I don't remember there being a post Christopher Reeve incarnation of a super something.
Well, that kind of surprises me, and you should really be embarrassed.
I
that
know,
you
I
don't
am.
know this.
Please tell me about this.
After the Salkinds sold the rights to Canon to do Superman, they retained the rights, and they also did the Supergirl movie,
Okay.
which was a bomb.
Yeah, I remember
But
that.
then they had the rights to the Superboy version of the character, and they decided to do, again, this is 1988, right after Star Trek The Next Generation, the syndicated boom.
Okay.
And they put on a show, a Superboy live action show that was shot at Universal Studios Florida, where Swamp Thing was also shot. And you want to talk about cheap production value. Although I have to say the effects were somewhere like a little bit, maybe a notch higher than the flying effects in Superman 4.
Wow.
But they still were bad.
Put that on your resume.
And they had two guys, it lasted 4 seasons. Now, it's an interesting
Really?
story. It lasted 4 seasons. It was quite popular. They had a lot of name guest stars playing characters. It was, like I said, it was cheesy. It was Clark in college, and, it was Lana Lang, and they had a Lex Luthor who was horrible. But they would bring in like Superman villains like Bizarro and Mxyzptlk and all these other characters.
Really?
And I wasn't religious with watching it, but I did, catch it from time to time. And now it is on DVD. They had an actor named John Hames Newton played Superboy in the first season, and then Gerard Christopher played him in the last 3 seasons. And here's the thing, the reason the show was canceled was because of Lois and Clark.
Oh, wow.
Warner Brothers wanted to put Lois and Clark on the air, and they shut down Superboy. They got it scuttled. They really, basically forced it off the air. And that's in a nutshell. You can read about it online, the
And
saga.
Lois and Clark lasted quite a long time.
Lois and Clark also lasted 4 years. And the interesting thing is, and Gerard Christopher, who played Superboy, claims that he auditioned to play Clark in Lois and Clark, and they liked him. But then they found out that he was Superboy, and then they said, no, we can't have you. And they, dismissed him, and they hired Dean Cain.
That's freaky.
Yeah.
That's just freaky.
But it was,
and I can't believe it was on for that long, and I completely flew under my radar.
It was, I want to say, who the hell knows? It was probably on either Channel 9 or Channel 11 in our local markets.
Our syndicated channels. The Human Target. Now, I remember not too long ago, maybe 5-6 years ago, there was a Human Target show based on a comic book.
Right.
But apparently that had already happened once before.
Yeah, around 92. Now, here's a character I know very, very little about, so I can't speak to a lot of, the character and how well it was adapted.
Yeah, but what's his deal? I don't know. I didn't remember.
He was like
there's no superpowers. It's just action.
He's like a super master of disguise, as I understand it. And of all people, I mean, this is 92, so we're talking right after The Flash, Rick Springfield.
I knew there was a reason I probably should be watching that show.
So I want to say that the show maybe lasted like 7 episodes, and I have the pilot. Again, I got it through sort of the trade community, and I never sought out the rest.
That good, huh?
Yeah.
But it's Rick Springfield.
Yeah.
How could you not like Rick Springfield?
And then I don't know why, but I was possibly because I was never interested in the character. When they did the rebooted series, whatever you want to call it, I didn't watch it.
Oh, I did. I used to watch it a little bit. I think actually I watched it all the way through.
Yeah.
It was more of I don't remember there being too much of disguises, but it was more of an action thing.
Yeah.
It was a guy, I forget the guy's name. He's in a lot of shows now. He appears everywhere.
Yeah.
And also the guy from, oh my God, the kid from the Bad News Bears who resurgence of his career all of a sudden.
Oh, Jackie Earl Haley.
Yep.
Yeah.
He played like the assistant, the assistant tough guy with guns type of guy.
Yeah,
it was interesting, but it was. I remember. It's based on a comic. Okay, I'll give it a shot. Whatever.
Right.
What can you tell me about Power Pack?
Power Pack was a popular Marvel comic. Again, I didn't read it, but I know a lot. I know of it. It was a group of superpowered children who I believe were all siblings, and that came about in the middle '80s. Marvel, created this series, and it lasted for a decent amount of time. Then, I mean, somewhere in I want to say 89, 90, maybe the latest, they shot a pilot that was so far under the radar. I don't even remember, the comic press, the media, like Wizard Magazine and Starlog and stuff like that, really didn't cover it. I don't even know if I had even heard about it when I came across it at a convention and bought a copy. And, it was like a half-hour mini pilot, some of those, 10-minute show reel kind of things.
Wow, not even a full-blown presentation.
It might have been even 20 minutes.
Yikes.
And I watched it once, put it away. It
burned it.
Well, I bought it and watched it out of sort of just the notion I'm a comic book person. I see all this stuff.
Just to say you did.
Just to say I did, but it made no impression on me. And
no names or anything like that?
No names at all. And yeah, I mean, it's really one of the more obscure of all that stuff. And, and again, it's, it was Marvel. It was put out at that time when everything Marvel tried failed. Even though we may not be covering this in the show, you're talking about at the same sort of era. You're talking about the Punisher movie. You're talking about the Captain America movie. Right. You're talking about the Fantastic Four, all this Generation X, Nick Fury, this sort of 7-8 year period.
Well, and Punisher had a couple of different tries. They'd multiply try that a couple of times.
Well, they did in 89 with the Dolph Lundgren. Then after Marvel had their renaissance, they tried it sort of in their good period with Thomas Jane and Ray Stevenson. But, their cheesy Punisher came out in 89 and went straight to video.
Yeah. Now, what about Nightman? What's Nightman?
That was it was an independent produced comic company called Malibu Comics, and they put out a line of comics called the Ultraverse, which were quite popular, and I read them. There was a boom in the 90s with these independent comic companies that were all sort of vying for market space, and some of them were quite good, and the Ultraverse was one of them. And of all the characters and of all the comics that actually made it to series, they got some animated stuff done, but this one, Nightman, came about, and it was, again, just cheesy. I can't remember really like what his deal was, if he was blind or if he could. Honestly, I can visualize the character, and I remember he was like a saxophone player or something or whatever.
This is, again, only pilot stage or actual series?
It was a series. I want to say it lasted like a full 26 episode syndicated season, maybe even 2. I'm not sure.
Wow.
But again, Channel 11, 7:30 on a Saturday night kind of a thing. And it...
let's go to something that you're definitely more familiar with, and so am I, because of how popular and how good we both love the show right now is The Flash. And the fact that one of the characters in The Flash, the father in jail, is the Flash from the original live action that you used to watch also.
John Wesley Shipp, who played the Flash in that show, is now playing Henry Allen, Barry's father.
Uh-huh.
Which is a nice nod to the original series, which I thought was a terrific series, which was sort of a direct result of the success of Batman. I mean, the Flash television series had the same sort of look, not as Tim Burton-y as the Batman movie, but it still had elements of it, had the Danny Elfman theme, and it was a serious attempt at the character. And the suit wasn't terrible for the time.
They got away from the campiness?
Oh, definitely. Even though they didn't start out doing villains from the comic, halfway through it sadly only lasted 1 season, and I was very disappointed that it was canceled. But they started to bring in a lot of elements from the comic, which I was really happy to see. And one of the really great villains from the comic that they used was the Trickster, who was played by Mark Hamill, who is now going to reprise the character.
Exactly. That is so cool.
On this new version, he's going to play the same role that he played in the original. This is what's really cool about the new series, is that they're taking characters from the original show, and they're like the Tina McGee, who was like the sidekick in the show. She's been on The Flash. Amanda Pays is the actress, and she's been on. And
the only other show I can imagine that was successful in doing something like this was Battlestar Galactica, where they brought in another character playing a different role, but in a major way.
But what's interesting is in this case, with the case of the Tina McGee character, with the case of the Trickster character, they're playing in universe. So what I'm saying is
you're melding them.
They're melding them in some way that I think they're going to start. This is a whole other conversation, but they're starting to bring in time travel elements and multi-dimensional elements into the show. Yeah, I
heard that there's something really big about to happen that's going to really freak everybody out.
What I want to happen, and I don't, you never know with this show because they're really ballsy, is that maybe John Wesley Shipp, the father, was the Flash. You know what I'm saying? Like that there was a Flash. You know what I'm saying? Like, because if you're taking characters from that universe, from that show, but you're leaving out the Flash.
Like this whole series is a parallel universe.
Right. I think that there's a lot that could happen. But let me just, to go back to the original show, I liked it a lot. I was very sad to see it go. John Wesley Shipp was a great actor, great character, really loved playing the Flash, was very good in the role, and it sadly was a victim of just a bad time slot, maybe a little bit before its time, and
Yeah. Well, let's close it off with what I would consider to be the granddaddy of all of these type of presentations, films or television shows. And it's one that I know you've done editorials about it in the past, and we could do an entire show about just the production of this particular thing. But let's talk a little bit about the Fantastic Four film, the Corman one.
That was, it's a movie that gets a bad rap, but I'll tell you something. I think it has a very sort of, it's been maligned and criticized, and I think it's really, really a disservice to the people who made it because they did their best. They did not know that this movie was made just to be shelved, and that, again, it is a whole other conversation.
It's a whole other story.
Yeah, and they're actually coming out with a documentary about it in a few months. That's
they've been teasing that for a while now. I can't wait to see it.
I've been following it on Facebook, and they've had some YouTube trailers, and it looks like it's going to really blow the lid off the story. The people who, again, Marvel had sold the rights to every character they had to all these producers in the 80s to make a few bucks. But these deals all stipulated that you had to make the movie within a certain amount of time or else the rights went back to Marvel. That was the case with the Fantastic Four. This German producer named Bernd Eichinger had the rights. he was going to lose the rights. In order not to lose the rights of doing the Reader's Digest version, he brought the property to Roger Corman, said, I need to make a movie. In a month, I'm going to lose the rights. And who else but Roger Corman could mount a production in that short amount of time? Obviously, it was going to be cheap, but he could do it. So they got it done. They shot a movie, before before January 1st of 93, they had to shoot this movie.
And that's nothing unusual, especially these days where the rights are about to expire, so they rush something.
Right. And that's exactly what Fox did with the Fantastic Four, the movie that's coming out this year.
Or the Spider-Man films, the reboots.
Yeah. So, or X-Men. Any Marvel property that's at another studio will keep getting churned out, or else Marvel gets it back, like Daredevil, like Ghost Rider, like Punisher, like Hulk. Marvel has all those characters back. Anyway, so they make the movie. The movie, they have trailers for it, they have articles about it, and then all of a sudden, it vanishes. It vanishes. The real reason, is who paid for this movie not to get released. I think the documentary is going to explain all that. But anyway, now, I had already seen a couple of trailers, and I really wanted to see this movie. I didn't care if it was going to be cheesy, low budget, whatever. That was what I was used to. So, I don't know, the first convention I went to after I heard it was shelved, somebody had a copy, and I bought it. And I want to say this was 94, maybe, or, late 94, early 95. And I'll tell you something, I'll defend it to this day. The movie is not bad. It has its flaws. Mostly the flaws have to do with the production value and the effects.
Well, yeah, I mean, you have a definite sentimental attachment to this film. I couldn't put it in the same standard as Superman or Batman, or even that kind of stuff. But there's something special about it.
And the actors, the people involved in the movie, they gave it their all, and they honored the characters, and that's the most important thing. That's what all these other things, these other shows and movies that we've been talking about this whole show got wrong.
It's just a job.
It's either was just a job, or they camped it up, or they ignored the source material. The Fantastic Four movie did not. They did everything in their power to honor the comic. And that's why, I mean, I'm taking it a little far. I mean, I've corresponded with all the actors. I mean, not only do I have their autographs, but I have letters and stuff from them. And I can't wait for this documentary.
Cease and desist orders?
No, yeah. And they also, the director of the guys who were making the documentary, they did a Kickstarter campaign for the documentary, and I contributed a modest amount of money to it.
And we'll put links to all this stuff too.
Yeah, and for the contributors, there are actually a lot of nice swag that they give the contributors. One of them was a downloadable commentary from the director, which I was able to sync up with my bootleg and watch, and it was great. Here I'm watching this movie for the 40th time, but with an actual director's commentary. And, as I said,
they should include, obviously, the GeekFest Rants commentary that we should record one day.
Yeah, well, which I'd be happy to do. But that's the thing that sets it apart from everything that we've been discussing, is that this one had its heart in the right place. It was only constricted by budget. And I think if they had the money that Fox has to put, these other movies out, it would have been a damn good production. But, and it still lives on. I mean, people, whereas Captain America and the Punisher and everything, people still laugh at, people take this movie seriously, and it has a huge cult following.
Right. Now, this was obviously then followed up years later with the remake of a pair of Fantastic Four films, and now we're coming up once again, a new reinterpretation of it, and we'll see where this one goes.
Yeah, I mean, I saw there was a lot of negative speculation about it, but then the trailer hit, and now people, including myself, are kind of like, this might not suck.
Well, again, when we're dealing with trailers, I would say 90% of trailers, I love them. I love every single freaking trailer. It's the actual movie that usually then is where, what happens when, the goods are delivered.
Obviously, but I mean, from everything I had been hearing, I was like, this is going to be a piece of shit. But this trailer intrigued me. But,
now,
we'll
the Fantastic Four movie that we just talked about is also, I would imagine, kind of falls into that same territory that we mentioned before, or something like Swamp Thing, where it's not so much that it's a bad movie, it's just that it tanked. it completely.
Well, it was never
tanked.
even
and in
released.
this case, it was never released, so it was doomed. Isn't that part of the thing? Doomed was the name.
Yeah.
Isn't that the name of the the documentary? Because it was dead before it even got out of the gate.
Because at least almost everything that we've been discussing got straight to video.
Right.
This went nowhere. So the people never saw any sort of return on, maybe they got paid initially for the work that they did, but, whereas you get royalties and stuff and,
No.
they got nothing and their careers went nowhere. So, I mean, it really, really sucked for them.
Yeah. Well, this has been really good. I really, not only did I was able to dig up a lot of, things to talk about in this particular show, but I know Steve educated me as usual on some of these things that I have never even heard of. I had no clue what they were, but it's cool. Again, if you're into these comic book movies, especially if you're young, go and look this stuff up because it's history.
Sure.
It's part of, just like you might be into early editions of certain comic books. Well, this is like the early editions of all these movies you're watching now.
Yeah.
Dig it up. Half of it already lives on YouTube. The other half you might have to do a little more research on,
Right.
but it's all out there.
Right, yeah.
So I want to thank Steve, obviously, for joining me today and participating in this special episode we have for you. Yeah. And as usual, you guys for listening. And we will see you here next time at GeekFest Rants. Bye-bye, everybody.
Chosen from among all others by the immortal elders Solomon, Hercules, Atlas, Zeus, Achilles, Mercury, Billy Batson and his mentor travel the highways and byways of the land on a never-ending mission to right wrongs, to develop understanding, and to seek justice for all. In time of dire need, young Billy has been granted the power by the immortals to summon awesome forces at the utterance of a single word. Shazam! Which transforms him in a flash into the mightiest of mortal beings, Captain Marvel.
I don't know what they were smoking when they cast him.
Come here, kid. I want to show you something. Come here.
Rick Springfield.
Whenever you watch these things on YouTube, they kind of look like porn.